Hello there, I'm Rafael de Furia, back at it again for another, this week, Monday night. Also, I'll be back on Friday. Later in the video also, I'm planning to go out because there is an event taking place in my town in protest of what's going on here. Just to quickly say as a disclaimer, if I were concerned that this would be any type of event that would be dangerous, I wouldn't personally be taking a risk to go there myself. But at the same time, I can't recommend for anybody to go out to any kind of events right now. This just happens to be something that I felt is necessary to show a bit more of what life is like and what is going on here in Italy right now, which is a big goal of my channel, to express what life is really like here. But what has become another big part of life here is some of these updates that are happening. And as some of you may know, we had a pretty big one over the weekend. So I felt as though that this might actually be time to bring out that second video for the week, which will, I guess, be technically the first video for this week. Like I was mentioning on Friday night, it's an idea I've been toying around with. I can't guarantee that every week I'll do this, but with such a big update like we've had this weekend, I felt it would be better to talk about this tonight rather than let it wait until Friday, by the time it's already old and outdated. But before we get too much deeper into this video, a huge thank you to those of you who helped to make this content possible through Patreon, and also a big thank you to those of you who are subscribed and who continually check out these videos and share them with your friends and give them likes, because it very much does help out the channel immensely. But tonight, let's talk a bit more about what's happening here in Italy. Just to go over this new DCPM, this new decree, to talk a little bit about it because it governs a lot of what is going on in life in Italy right now. I read it through the official website of the Italian government. And just also to preface this video, I will be leaving some parts out that are either not new information or that are less interesting, and I will be paraphrasing at some points just because of the translation. If you directly translate it from Italian to English, it doesn't totally work in English, because sometimes the literal translation of some of these words and some of the terminology, we just use it a little bit differently in English. It's very interesting. There are some places where they put in, of course, some very new big updates, but at the same time, there are some things that aren't really changing that much, or they're practically the same thing, just said again. It was written in such a way that they're trying to make it clear that this was written for protecting the nation of Italy and for trying to consider all of the various factors that go into this. And actually, in the first section, from my understanding, it does seem as though that's the intention behind this. At the proposal of the Minister of Health, after hearing the Ministers of the Interior, Defense, Economy, and Finance, as well as the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Education, Justice, Infrastructure, of all of the cultural assets and activities for public administration and youth policies, for equal opportunities and the family. It's a lot of words, but I can't really help but wonder, because we are going to be talking a little bit later in this video about some of the closures going on. Do closures really support equal opportunities? That's just a question that I'm putting out there. I'm not saying that it does or that it doesn't, that it protects or that it doesn't protect. I just can't help but wonder, as an average person, if that's really something that can be done in this situation with this approach. And then on streets or squares in urban centers where people may gather or congregate, they can be closed after 9 p.m. But that decision seems to be left up to local authorities, because of course in Italy it's very common that people hang out on streets or in piazzas, on street corners, and congregate in these areas. That's just part of social life in Italy. That's not anything strange. That's just what happens here. The outdoor spaces are very often used as people's personal living rooms and so on. But this next one has created a lot of questions for people in the country, as well as a number of other sections, because there is some terminology and that is used here that doesn't seem to be explicitly defined what it means. And the term strong recommendation comes up a number of times. And so people are wondering, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that you're not supposed to, but you still can? Or if you don't follow the strong recommendation, can you actually get into trouble because of that? That's something that I keep seeing coming up online, and I personally haven't heard a really good explanation of it to define that and clarify that point. But anyway, it is strongly recommended that all persons not move by public or private means of transport, except for the needs of work, study, health reasons, or situations of necessity. So that's, again, another term that I know some people have had some questions about. What constitutes situation of necessity? Of course, I'm sure, like we saw earlier, situation of necessity seemed to define going to the doctor or going to the supermarket, getting food for yourself to make sure you can have that. But I've been seeing some interesting questions pop up. If, for example, the light bulb goes out in your apartment, would that constitute a situation of necessity if you need to buy a new lamp? Or, for example, I did see somebody ask an interesting question online. What if for their mental health, they need to go to the beach so that they can get away from things and just relieve stress? I personally think that's a fair question. I'm assuming the answer would be that you shouldn't, because you could come into contact with other people. But again, there are these terms and phrases used that almost seem to not have a strict definition. There are a few places in here where I will give it to them that they did clarify and that they did establish a definition, but there are other places where that didn't necessarily seem to be the case, but we'll get to those points. But in regards to assembly in general, it does seem to allow for religious services in places of worship as long as the rules are respected. But again, this is another situation of where some skipping around is necessary. And then also in another section, there is something that does seem to contradict this point. I've seen people online a little bit confused about them. In section F, the activities of gyms, swimming pools, pool centers, spa centers, except for those that are mandatory for healthcare or who carry out the provision of services within the essential levels of assistance, seem to be completely unable to continue for the time being, except for those that are deemed essential or necessary. It would seem to say that also in section I, that events are allowed provided that social distancing and other measures of containment are observed. So going back to what I mentioned in my last video from Friday, I can't help but wonder if technically the Christmas markets could have maybe happened. Is that considered an event, or is that considered a market, or what is that classification there? Of course, I'm not the most educated when it comes to these legal classifications and what would constitute these specific things. But if it's a public event, then I couldn't help but wonder maybe if it could have gone on, if these Christmas markets could have actually been allowed, if the numbers would be limited, like I had said last time, with specific designated entries and exits. But I can also imagine that they would be closing them down, like I said last time, in hopes of maybe not getting people to travel from various parts of the country or even from other countries, in hopes of not spreading this situation and making it worse. And I would also assume that there could be some kind of liability issue there. The activities of amusement, arcades, betting rooms, so as part of this, bingo halls and casinos. This is something that in Italy, you do see in quite a few places, that you'll see these little betting halls, like where people go and bet on horse races and so on, and that they will maybe have a couple slot machines, but for the time being, no go. Shows open to the public in theaters are suspended, as well as concert halls, cinemas, and other spaces, even seemingly outdoors. Discos and dance halls and other similar venues, even outdoors, are closed. That's one thing that I'm not 100% sure if that's been the case this whole time, because I'm not the type of person that really goes to discotheques and goes out dancing to begin with. But I know earlier this year that there were some bars that were allowed to remain open, but they just had to close off their dance floors. But if discos were actually able to open this year at all, that's something I'm not totally clear on. But going on to parties, indoors and outdoors, are now prohibited, including civil and religious ceremonies. So going back to what I was talking about before with religious services and places of worship, it almost feels to me like there's a little bit of a contradiction there. But of course, like we saw previously, that the numbers for these events had been limited. So if we're talking about weddings, okay, that's definitely something where I could see that happening. I know of one wedding recently that happened where there was one person who ended up testing positive there, and a whole bunch of other people from that wedding ended up testing positive. And then in regards to events in private homes, it is strongly recommended, again, there's this term, strongly recommended, not to receive people other than cohabitants except for situations regarding work or situations of need and urgency. So work, okay, that's fine. That seems to be pretty clear. Situations of need and urgency. I would assume that means like if somebody is at home and they need care, they are unable to live by themselves without somebody to go and check in on them. I would assume that's what it's talking about here. But of course, this term strongly recommended has come up again. And I know there are a lot of people in the country that are asking for clarification. What exactly does that mean? But then moving on to one of the most major parts of the DCPM and why actually there is this protest that is happening here where I live. Actually, in a little while from now, I might be starting to run late. Is that there are people who are very angry and concerned and scared and frustrated that there are so many closures and that they are not going to be able to work and that their livelihood is being very directly affected. And so where I live, there's been a call for people to go out. And I'm not a protester. I'm not somebody who ever takes part in these sorts of things. I would only be going as someone just to document what's going on and just to share what's going on here in Italy. But it's for people who are in these jobs where they can't work, like for example, waiters, waitresses, restaurant owners, chefs, and other store owners, and for anybody else who feels strongly about this to go and stand in solidarity together in the main piazza here in the town where I live. But anyway, in part EE, the activities of catering services, including bars, pubs, restaurants, ice cream parlors, and pastry shops, are allowed to be open from 5 a.m. until 6 p.m. And yes, that is a pretty big portion of the day. But of course, you have to consider what are the hours of operations that are more popular. And this would fall just right outside of that if we're going to talk about going out for an aperitivo. This is right before that main aperitivo time. Of course, yes, this is to limit the amount of people after these times, but actually the president of the region where I live, Mr. Zaia, he said in his opinion, he felt as though it would be reasonable to limit it to 11 o'clock at night, but 6 o'clock in the evening seems to be almost a bit much. And if we're going to talk about from an economic standpoint, I would say that's a pretty big time when businesses really rely on for being able to serve their customers. But moving on, the consumption at the table is allowed for a maximum of 4 people per table unless they are living together. After 6 p.m., the consumption of food and drinks in public places is prohibited. But it seems as though they are allowing some places to remain open without any time limits. And that would be places that limit their catering to only people that are accommodated within the facilities. So for example, like a hotel. But it does say here that home delivery is always allowed in respect of the sanitary norms, both for the activities of packaging and transport. And from what I was also understanding, up until midnight, takeaway can be happening. But there is a ban on consumption in the spot in that area where you've purchased it and also in the vicinity. It has to be taken home from what I'm understanding here. So it is very nice to see that we aren't in the same situation like we were earlier this year where everything was completely shut tight. At least now some businesses do have the option of remaining at least partially open, but I know that there's a lot of businesses that can't really survive on takeaway alone. But anyway, this is the part where I get out to the protest that is happening here. I'm going to head out right now in the next couple minutes. But like I said before, I'm not somebody who's a protester. I'm just somebody who is curious to document this part of life in Italy and to share that. And if I really had a concern of any danger to myself or my equipment, I wouldn't be going personally. Of course, I'm not saying that anybody even should be going to one of these events, because we have seen in some of the major cities here, not only protests, but rioting and some really very scary stuff. Here in the city where I live, I have never seen a protest go violent. I mean, it's so much so that even the last one that was here, the most major one that I saw, it was a concert more than anything. If I had a very serious concern of danger, I wouldn't be going. But because this is just another reality of what's going on here in Italy, I did feel as though it would be important to show. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on another, well, this time Monday night. I look forward to seeing you all on Friday night. And thank you, of course, to all of those of you who are helping to make this project possible through Patreon. And of course, a huge thank you to those of you who are subscribed to this channel, who've been liking the videos and sharing the videos. It is really such a huge help to this channel. And thank you to those of you who've been continuing to watch these videos. It seems as though these updates have been really well received by you guys. And so thank you so much for all of your positive feedback in regards to what I'm doing here with this project. It is so very greatly appreciated. Anyway, thank you for joining me again, and I will see you all on Friday night. Stay safe, stay healthy out there. Later.